The crisp autumn wind whipped through the concrete canyons of New York City, sending leaves dancing across the sidewalk outside Trump Tower. Among the usual crowd of tourists and busy office workers, a lone figure sat quietly against the building's polished granite wall. Her weathered jacket, despite its worn edges, bore proud military medals that caught the sunlight when she moved. The woman, a former Army combat medic, hadn't planned on ending up here. Just 3 years ago, she had been saving lives in the dusty fields of Afghanistan, her steady hands and quick thinking keeping countless soldiers alive during the most critical moments. Now, those same hands clutched a small cardboard sign, her fingers red from the cold. Life after service hadn't gone as planned. The nightmares came first, vivid flashbacks of explosions, of wounded soldiers calling for help, of split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, and slowly the walls of her civilian life began to crumble. The benefits she had earned through her service seemed trapped behind an endless maze of paperwork and bureaucracy. Phone calls went unreturned, emails disappeared into administrative black holes, and appointments were scheduled months apart. With each passing day, her savings dwindled until finally they vanished completely. The streets of New York became her new battlefield. Instead of medical supplies, she now carried everything she owned in a worn backpack. Her military training helped her survive, knowing where to find shelter, how to stay warm, how to remain alert. But it couldn't heal the deep sense of betrayal she felt. The country she had risked her life for seemed to have forgotten her. Yet even in her current situation, she maintained a soldier's dignity. Her clothes, though old, were as clean as she could keep them. Her hair was neatly tied back, and those medals, 3 tours worth of courage and sacrifice, were polished every morning with the corner of her sleeve. They were more than decorations. They were reminders of who she was, of the lives she had saved, of the person she could be again. Businessmen in expensive suits hurried past, their eyes carefully avoiding hers. Tourists paused to take selfies with the tower's golden letters, unaware of the hero sitting just feet away. Children occasionally pointed at her medals, only to be quickly hushed by their parents and pulled along. A street vendor who set up his hot dog cart nearby would sometimes share his unsold food with her at the end of the day. "You served our country," he'd say with a kind smile, refusing any payment she tried to offer from the few dollars generous passers-by had given her. These small acts of kindness kept her hope alive, even on the coldest days. She spent her days watching the steady stream of people flowing in and out of the tower's revolving doors. Some faces she began to recognize, the security guards who would nod respectfully at her medals, the cleaning staff who sometimes snuck her bottles of water, the regular office workers who occasionally stopped to chat. One particularly cold morning, she found a new blanket carefully placed beside her while she dozed, along with a cup of hot coffee. The security guard on duty just shrugged when she looked questioningly at him, but his small smile told her everything she needed to know. These moments of human connection, however brief, helped her remember that she wasn't invisible. She kept a small notebook in her pocket where she wrote down the names and stories of other veterans she met on the streets. Some had served in different wars, different branches, different decades, but their stories shared a common thread: the struggle to find their place in a world that moved too fast, that had little time for the invisible wounds they carried. The sound of cameras clicking and excited murmurs from the crowd pulled her from her thoughts. Another motorcade was arriving, a common sight at the tower. She didn't look up, having seen this scene play out countless times before. But this time would be different. This time, the rhythmic click of expensive shoes on concrete would stop right in front of her, and a voice she had heard countless times on television would speak directly to her. Nobody could have predicted what would happen next, not the surprised security detail, not the gathering crowd of onlookers, and certainly not the veteran herself. As the morning traffic honked and hundreds of smartphones recorded the moment, a simple act of human kindness was about to unfold, one that would change not just one life, but spark a movement that would touch thousands more. The stage was set for an encounter that would remind America of its promise to its veterans, of the power of human connection, and of how a single moment of genuine compassion could cut through the noise of political division. But in that moment, none of that mattered to the woman with the medals. All she knew was that, for the first time in a very long time, someone was stopping to truly see her. The usual bustle of Fifth Avenue seemed to slow down as the black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Secret Service agents emerged first, their earpieces and dark suits creating a protective bubble around the tower entrance. Donald Trump had just returned from a campaign rally, his signature red tie visible through the tinted windows as his vehicle came to a stop. What happened next broke every security protocol in the book. As Trump stepped onto the sidewalk, something caught his eye. A gleam of metal against worn fabric. The veteran's medals, polished that morning as always, had caught the afternoon sun at just the right angle. For a moment, he stood still, his eyes fixed on the decorations that told the story of sacrifice and service. The Secret Service agents shifted uncomfortably as their protectee suddenly changed direction. Instead of heading for the tower's golden doors, Trump moved toward the veteran sitting against the wall. The crowd that always gathered to catch a glimpse of the former president grew silent, phones raised to capture whatever was about to unfold. "Those medals," Trump said, his voice softer than his usual public tone. "You earned those defending our country." Breaking protocol even further, he did something that made his security detail visibly nervous. He knelt down on the concrete sidewalk, his expensive suit meeting the same ground where the veteran had spent countless nights. The veteran straightened up instinctively, military training kicking in even after all these years. "3 tours, sir," she replied, her voice clear despite her circumstances. "Combat medic. Afghanistan." The words came out with pride, untouched by the hardships that had followed her service. The busy New York streets seemed to fade away as Trump listened to her story. Gone was the boisterous campaign personality, replaced by something rarely seen on camera: quiet attention. He noticed her fingers still bearing the calluses from years of handling medical equipment and carrying wounded soldiers to safety. Her eyes still held the alertness of someone used to scanning horizons for danger, even here among the skyscrapers. "Tell me everything," he said, settling himself more comfortably on the sidewalk despite his security team's visible discomfort. "Tell me how you ended up here." The crowd of onlookers grew, but their usual excited chatter was replaced by respectful silence as they witnessed this unexpected scene. For the next 20 minutes, the veteran shared her journey. She spoke of the nights spent trying to save lives under heavy fire, of the friends she'd lost, and of the memories that still wouldn't let her sleep. She described the frustrating maze of Veterans Affairs paperwork, the unanswered calls, the appointments scheduled months apart while her savings disappeared and her rent went unpaid. Trump's expression changed as she spoke about the bureaucratic obstacles that had worn her down even more than the war itself. His fingers drummed against his knee, a gesture familiar to those who knew him well, usually meaning his mind was already racing ahead to solutions. The crowd had grown larger, but something unusual was happening. Instead of the usual political arguments that often broke out around Trump's appearances, people were listening. Some wiped away tears. Others nodded in recognition, veterans themselves or family members of those who served. The veteran's story was breaking through the usual divisions, touching something more fundamental than political allegiance. A young boy in the crowd tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, why is a hero sitting on the street?" The question hung in the air, making several adults shift uncomfortably. The truth of it, the contradiction between the medals and the cardboard sign, seemed to hit everyone at once. Trump stood up slowly, his expression determined. He reached into his pocket for his phone, but paused before dialing. "You saved American lives," he said, looking directly at the veteran. "Now it's our turn to save yours." The words weren't delivered like a campaign promise or a media soundbite. They carried the weight of a personal commitment. The veteran watched as he stepped away to make several calls, her expression a mix of hope and cautious disbelief. She had learned the hard way not to trust in easy solutions. But something felt different this time. The crowd stayed, forming a protective circle around her, as if their collective presence could help guard against any more broken promises. As the sun began to set behind the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows between the buildings, no one could have predicted how this chance encounter would ripple out to affect not just one life, but the lives of thousands of veterans across the country. A new chapter was about to begin, sparked by a simple moment of human connection on a busy New York street. The next hour unfolded like a dream as the veteran found herself sitting in the warm lobby of Trump Tower, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. The marble floors and golden fixtures were a stark contrast to the concrete sidewalk she'd called home for the past months. Trump sat across from her, his red tie loosened, looking more like a concerned friend than a former president. "Start from the beginning," he said quietly, waving away an aide who tried to remind him about his next appointment. "Tell me about your time in service." The lobby had been cleared except for necessary security personnel, creating a bubble of privacy in the usually bustling space. The veteran's story poured out, her words gaining strength as she spoke. She described the heat of Afghanistan, the weight of medical equipment on her back as she ran through gunfire to reach wounded soldiers. Her hands moved as she talked, unconsciously demonstrating how she had applied tourniquets, dressed wounds, and held the hands of young soldiers as they waited for evacuation helicopters. "The hardest part wasn't the combat," she explained, her coffee now cold and forgotten. "It was coming home. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right anymore." She described the sleepless nights, the way everyday sounds, a car backfiring, a door slamming, would send her heart racing back to the battlefield. Trump listened intently, his usual fast-paced speech and quick interruptions nowhere to be seen. His eyes narrowed when she described her first attempts to get help through the VA system. The endless phone calls, the websites that crashed mid-application, the appointments scheduled months apart. She explained how her savings dwindled as she waited for her benefits to be processed, how her landlord's patience ran out, how she finally found herself on the street with nothing but her backpack and her medals. "I tried everything," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Worked odd jobs, stayed in shelters when I could. But the nightmares made it hard to keep regular hours, and some places, they don't understand what it's like, living with memories like these." The former president's fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair, a habit those close to him knew meant his mind was working overtime. "You have the skills to save lives under fire," he said, "but the system couldn't even save you from homelessness." It wasn't a question, but a statement of understanding that made the veteran's eyes water for the first time during their conversation. She told him about the other veterans she'd met on the streets, the Vietnam vet who shared his blanket with her during her first week homeless, the young Marine who helped her find safe places to sleep, the Air Force mechanic who taught her which restaurants would give away leftover food at closing time. Each story painted a picture of a hidden community of heroes supporting each other when the system failed them. As she spoke about her fellow veterans, Trump's expression changed. The political mask fell away completely, replaced by genuine concern and growing determination. He asked detailed questions about the specific roadblocks she'd encountered, which forms had been lost, which officers had failed to respond, which procedures had taken the longest. "The thing is," she said, looking down at her metal-decorated jacket, "I'm not asking for handouts. I just want the chance to use my skills again, to help people like I did in the service." But without an address, without a phone, she gestured helplessly, the frustration of months of closed doors evident in her voice. Trump leaned forward in his chair. "You know what I'm hearing?" he asked, his voice carrying that tone of certainty his supporters knew well. "I'm hearing about a highly trained medical professional who saved lives under the worst conditions imaginable, who never gave up trying to serve others, even when the system gave up on her." The veteran straightened slightly in her chair, feeling seen for the first time in months not as a homeless person, but as the skilled professional she was. Trump pulled out his phone, but before dialing, he looked at her again. "We're going to fix this," he said, "not just for you, but for every veteran sleeping on these streets tonight. But first things first, let's get you back on your feet." As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tower's windows, neither of them knew that this conversation would spark a chain of events that would change not just one life, but the lives of countless veterans across the country. The veteran's story, told in that quiet lobby, was about to become a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond the golden doors of Trump Tower. The lobby of Trump Tower buzzed with sudden activity as the former president sprang into action. His phone came out, and his fingers moved quickly across the screen, pulling up contacts that hadn't been used in months. The veteran watched in quiet amazement as Trump, still sitting across from her, began making calls that would change her life. "Listen, I need a favor," he said into the phone, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making things happen. "I'm sitting here with one of our combat medics. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Saved countless lives. And now she's sleeping on the street because of paperwork." He paused, listening to the response. "No, this can't wait until Monday. We're fixing this today." The veteran noticed people starting to move around them with purpose. A young woman appeared with a laptop, typing rapidly as Trump fired off instructions. Another staff member arrived with fresh coffee and sandwiches, placing them quietly on the table between them. The veteran couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. "You still have that contact at the Veterans Medical Center?" Trump asked someone over the phone. "Good. I need you to call them. Right now." He turned to the veteran between calls. "When was the last time you had a full medical checkup?" The question was gentle but direct, showing genuine concern rather than pity. As the afternoon wore on, the veteran watched in astonishment as Trump orchestrated a response that cut through months of red tape in a matter of hours. He called hotel managers, veterans advocates, and medical professionals. Each call was direct and purposeful, focused on immediate action rather than promises. "Here's what's happening," Trump explained during a brief pause between calls. "First, you're getting a proper place to stay. Not a shelter, a hotel room. Real bed, hot shower, room service if you want it." He held up his hand when she started to protest. "This isn't charity. This is what we owe you for your service." A hotel manager arrived personally to handle the arrangements, treating the veteran with the respect her medals deserved rather than the hesitation her current situation usually inspired. Trump made sure the reservation was for a month, not just a few nights, giving her the stability she desperately needed. Next came the medical team. Trump had arranged for a veterans healthcare specialist to see her that evening, right there in the tower. "You've been taking care of others for years," he said firmly when she tried to say it wasn't necessary. "Time to let someone take care of you." The veteran's eyes widened as a legal advisor walked in, carrying a thick folder of documents. Trump had called in experts who specialized in veterans' benefits, people who knew how to navigate the system's complexities. They began sorting through her paperwork right there, identifying the missing pieces that had held up her benefits for so long. "Your service records are solid gold," the legal advisor said, reviewing her file. "The medals, the commendations, everything's here. The system just failed to connect the dots." He looked up at Trump. "We can have her benefits reinstated within 72 hours with the right pressure." Trump nodded, then turned back to his phone. More calls followed, to veterans advocacy groups, to employment specialists, to housing coordinators. Each conversation built another piece of the support network the veteran had been missing for so long. A young staff member appeared with shopping bags full of necessities, clean clothes, toiletries, a new phone with a prepaid plan. "You need to be reachable," Trump explained, "for the doctors, the legal team, and especially for job interviews." The veteran sat quietly, watching this whirlwind of activity around her. After months of being invisible on the streets, of systems that seemed designed to fail her, of doors that stayed firmly closed, she was witnessing what could happen when someone with power decided to cut through the red tape. "I know this is a lot to take in," Trump said, noticing her overwhelmed expression. "But here's what you need to know. Every person in this room right now is here because they want to help. Not because I told them to, but because they know it's the right thing to do." As evening approached, a comprehensive plan had taken shape. The veteran would have secure housing, medical care, legal support, and a clear path back to using her medical skills. But more importantly, she had something she'd lost months ago: hope. Trump stood up, straightening his tie. "Tomorrow, we start working on helping the others," he said, referring to the other veterans she'd told him about during their conversation. "But tonight you rest. Real bed, real food, real safety." He handed her a business card with his private number. "Any problems you call, day or night." The veteran stood too, military bearing returning to her posture. "Thank you, sir," she said simply, years of service teaching her that sometimes the simplest words carried the most meaning. "No," Trump replied, his voice firm. "Thank you for your service. We should have done this a long time ago." The story spread like wildfire across social media. Someone had captured the moment when Trump knelt beside the homeless veteran, and within hours, the video had gone viral. But something unexpected happened. Instead of turning into another political talking point, the focus shifted to the veteran herself and the broader issues she represented. Morning news shows picked up the story, but not in the usual way. Instead of debating politics, they invited veterans advocates to speak about the challenges facing service members returning home. The combat medic's story became a window into a world many Americans had never truly seen. "It's not just about one veteran," said a retired military officer on a popular morning show. "It's about the thousands of heroes sleeping on our streets tonight." The officer explained how the complicated benefits system often left veterans tangled in paperwork while their savings disappeared. Social media platforms filled with similar stories. Veterans began sharing their own experiences, the endless waits for appointments, the lost paperwork, the struggle to translate military skills into civilian jobs. Each story added another piece to a puzzle that had been hiding in plain sight. Local news stations across the country began investigating veteran homelessness in their own cities. They found similar stories everywhere. Highly trained military personnel sleeping in cars, skilled medics unable to get civilian medical certifications, combat engineers working odd jobs to survive. The veterans' medals had sparked something in people's minds. These weren't just homeless individuals, they were trained professionals, heroes who had served their country, now struggling to survive on the same streets they had sworn to protect. A group of medical students started a petition asking state licensing boards to create fast-track programs for combat medics. These people performed emergency medicine under fire, their petition stated. They deserve a chance to use those skills here at home. Business owners began reaching out. A nationwide hotel chain offered temporary housing for homeless veterans in cities across America. Hospitals started creating special hiring programs for veterans with medical experience. Tech companies offered free job training for veterans interested in cybersecurity. The conversation changed too. People stopped asking why veterans became homeless and started asking how to prevent it from happening in the first place. Veteran support organizations reported a surge in volunteers and donations. City councils across the country began reviewing their policies on veteran services. Local communities got involved in their own ways. Coffee shops started suspended coffee programs where customers could prepay for veterans' drinks. Barbershops offered free haircuts to homeless veterans preparing for job interviews. Small acts of kindness multiplied as people found ways to help. Religious leaders from different faiths came together to discuss how their communities could support veterans. Mosques opened their doors as warming centers during cold nights. Churches organized clothing drives. Synagogues set up food pantries specifically for veteran families in need. Schools began inviting veterans to speak about their experiences, not just on Veterans Day, but throughout the year. Children wrote letters to veterans' hospitals and drew pictures for VA center waiting rooms. The younger generation was learning to see veterans in a new light. The combat medic's story had touched something deep in the American spirit, the belief that those who serve deserve better than sleeping on sidewalks. People began looking at the medals on veterans' jackets differently, understanding that each one represented not just past service, but an ongoing promise. Politicians from both parties started working together on veteran issues. It wasn't about scoring political points anymore. It was about fixing a system that had failed too many heroes. Committee meetings that usually devolved into arguments stayed focused on solutions. Journalists dug deeper into the stories, moving beyond simple statistics to show the human face of veteran homelessness. They found former pilots working as night guards, submarine technicians living in shelters, intelligence officers unable to find work because their skills were classified. The national conversation had shifted. Instead of treating veteran homelessness as an unsolvable problem, people began seeing it as a challenge that could be overcome if everyone worked together. The combat medic's chance encounter outside Trump Tower had become a catalyst for change. As evening news programs covered the story, they focused not on the political aspect, but on the human element, how a simple act of stopping to listen had sparked a movement. The veteran's story had reminded America of something important. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of human connection. 3 weeks after that life-changing encounter outside Trump Tower, the combat medic stood in front of her hotel room mirror, adjusting her new blazer. The face looking back at her seemed different somehow, still bearing the strength that had carried her through war zones, but now with something new in her eyes: hope. The hotel room had become her temporary home base for rebuilding her life. Clean sheets, hot showers, and regular meals had worked wonders for her physical health. But it was the peace of mind, the security of knowing she had a safe place to sleep, that had made the biggest difference. Her new phone buzzed with a message, a reminder about her afternoon interview at the local hospital. The Veterans Advocacy Team had worked magic with her military medical certifications, translating her combat experience into credentials civilian hospitals could understand. Today might be the day she returned to doing what she loved most, helping others heal. The morning was packed with appointments, all part of her journey back to stability. First, a meeting with the legal team that had been untangling her benefits paperwork. "Your back pay has been approved," the lawyer told her with a smile. "The system finally recognized your service." The words brought tears to her eyes, not from the money, but from the validation of her sacrifices. Next came a session with a counselor who specialized in treating combat veterans. They talked about the nightmares that had plagued her for so long, the memories that still surfaced at unexpected moments. But now she had tools to handle them, techniques that helped her stay grounded when the past tried to pull her back. Her temporary housing at the hotel had been extended, giving her the stability she needed to focus on recovery. The staff had become like family, greeting her by name, celebrating each small victory in her journey. The room service manager even helped her practice interview questions during his breaks. As she walked through the hospital corridors for her interview, her military training showed in her posture, her medals proudly pinned to her blazer lapel. The interviewer, a former Navy corpsman, recognized the significance of her combat medical experience immediately. "Tell me about performing under pressure," he said. She shared stories of treating wounds under heavy fire, of making split-second decisions that saved lives. The interviewer nodded in understanding. These were exactly the skills they needed in their emergency department. By late afternoon, she had a job offer. Not an entry-level position, but a role that recognized her years of medical experience. The hospital's veteran hiring program even included housing assistance for the first 6 months, helping her transition from the hotel to her own apartment. Walking back through the city streets, she passed the spot where she had spent so many nights. A new homeless veteran sat there now, his own medals visible on a worn jacket. She stopped, knelt down beside him, and shared her story. "Come with me," she said, pulling out her phone. "I know some people who can help." That evening, back in her hotel room, she worked on a list. Not of things she needed anymore, but of ways to help others who were still struggling. Her military training had taught her to never leave anyone behind, and she intended to live by that principle in her civilian life too. The phone Trump had given her rang. He still checked in personally every few days. "Got the job," she told him, pride evident in her voice. His response was typically direct. "Never doubted you would. Ready to help others now." She looked at her list and smiled. She was more than ready. Her nightstand, once empty, now held symbols of her new life. Hospital ID badge, apartment listings, business cards from people eager to help other veterans. But most precious was a journal where she documented everything she learned about navigating the system, determined to make the path easier for those who would follow. Looking out her hotel window at the city lights, she thought about how much had changed in just 3 weeks. From sleeping on concrete to having a future again. From being invisible to having a voice that could help others. From surviving to thriving. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, starting her job, looking for an apartment, continuing her therapy. But for the first time in years, she felt equipped to handle whatever came her way. The combat medic who had saved so many lives on the battlefield was finally able to save her own. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with messages from other veterans she'd met along the way, each sharing their own progress, their own small victories. A community was forming, built on shared experiences and mutual support. Together, they were proving that no veteran's story had to end on the streets. 6 months after that fateful day outside Trump Tower, the combat medic stood at a podium, addressing a room full of politicians, business leaders, and fellow veterans. Her medals gleamed under the lights, but now they were pinned to a crisp white medical coat instead of a worn jacket. "I'm not here to tell you my story," she began, her voice steady and clear. I'm here to tell you about the thousands of other veterans who still need our help. Varun fell silent, captivated by the authority in her words, the passion in her voice. She had spent her days working in the hospital's emergency room, putting her combat medical skills to good use, saving lives once again. But her evenings and weekends were dedicated to a bigger mission, helping other veterans navigate the system that had once failed her. The small list she had started in her hotel room had grown into a full-fledged support network. Veterans who got back on their feet would turn around and help others, creating a chain reaction of positive change. They called it the Battle Buddy system, borrowing the military principle of always watching out for your fellow soldier. Her apartment, modest but comfortable, had become an informal meeting place. Veterans would gather around her kitchen table, sharing coffee and stories while working through paperwork together. Those who had jobs would mentor those still searching. Those with homes would help others find housing. The program she helped create at the hospital had hired 32 veterans so far, many of them former combat medics like herself. The emergency room staff had quickly learned to value their unique experience, their ability to stay calm under pressure, to make quick decisions, to work as a team. But the changes reached far beyond her local community. She had testified before Congress, sharing her story not for sympathy, but as evidence of what needed to fix. Her words, direct and honest, had helped push through reforms that streamlined the benefits process for all veterans. "We're not asking for handouts," she told the assembled leaders. "We're asking for the chance to serve again, to use our skills, to continue being assets to our communities." Her voice carried the weight of experience, of someone who had lived the problem and found solutions. The Battle Buddy system had spread to other cities, each location adapted to local needs, but built on the same principle: veterans helping veterans, supported by communities that understood their value. Business leaders in the audience nodded as she explained how hiring veterans had improved their companies. She shared success stories: the former Marine, who now ran a successful security company, hiring other veterans; the Air Force mechanic who had started a job training program; the Army cook who opened a restaurant staffed entirely by veterans and their families. Trump sat in the audience, watching the woman he had met on the sidewalk, now commanding attention from some of the most powerful people in the country. He smiled, remembering their first conversation, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. The combat medic's voice grew stronger as she reached the heart of her message. Every veteran on our streets represents a failure of our system, but also an opportunity to do better. These are trained leaders, skilled professionals, dedicated public servants. We just need to give them the chance to prove it again. She pulled out a worn notebook, the same one she had carried on the streets, and held it up. "In here are the names of veterans I met while I was homeless. Thanks to our program, every single one of them now has a home, a job, and hope for the future. But there are thousands more waiting for their chance." The audience listened as she outlined practical solutions: faster benefit processing, better job placement programs, improved mental health support. Each suggestion came from real experience, from knowing what actually worked on the ground. Looking out at the crowd, she saw faces that had become familiar over the months: business owners who had created veteran hiring programs, landlords who had adjusted their policies to help veterans find homes, medical professionals who had streamlined their certification processes for military training. "6 months ago, I was invisible," she said, her voice softening for a moment. "Today, I'm here to make sure no other veteran has to feel that way again." The room erupted in applause, but she raised her hand for silence. "Don't clap. Act. There's still work to be done." As she stepped down from the podium, her phone buzzed with messages from veterans across the country, each one a reminder of why she kept pushing forward. The combat medic who had once saved lives under fire was now saving them in a different way, proving that one moment of kindness could spark a movement that changed thousands of lives. The day ended as it always did, back at her apartment, sharing coffee with a group of veterans, planning their next steps. Because she knew that while her story might have started with a chance encounter outside Trump Tower, it wouldn't end until every veteran had the chance to write their own story of recovery and hope.